자, 이번에 제가 무대에 모실 분은 바이낸스의 리언 풍, Head of APEC 님이십니다. 강연 주제는 Why are we optimizing for regulator happiness and second guessing what they're saying입니다. 자, 여러분, 바이낸스의 Head of APEC 리언 풍 님을 큰 박수로 환영해 주십시오. Over there. Yes, that's right. Yep.
Well, I think it's great to see a crowd here today, so good afternoon to all of you. Thank you for the kind announcement, and a big thank you to Busan City and the Busan Metropolitan City for organizing the Blockchain Week. Certainly a pleasure to be here to talk about blockchain. But I think just to correct what the announcer mentioned earlier, the key topic that I'm here to talk about today is actually why do we need to adopt blockchain now? I think many times when I talk to regulators and I talk to key government stakeholders about crypto and blockchain, there are two questions that they always ask, which is why is there a need for blockchain technology? And why is there a need for blockchain today? And I think to answer this question, one key dimension that we really need to look at in the blockchain space that many people have failed to acknowledge is the dimension of time. And I think the why now question is super pertinent and important to all of us in this room. Because if it is not important to adopt blockchain right now and today, what are we doing in this room? What are we doing as participants in the ecosystem? And so if we take a step back, the crypto or digital asset industry is actually still in its very, very early stage. I think Bitcoin has just been around for just over 10 years. Binance as a company just celebrated its 5th year anniversary. But I think one thing to take note of is as an asset class, the digital assets still stands today at around over $1 trillion in total market cap. 1 year ago, during the bull market, the total market cap stood at around $2.7 trillion. And 2 years ago, if we look at October 2020, right, just right in the heart of COVID, the total market cap of digital assets was around $420 billion. So yes, there's volatility. Yes, we've seen the asset class grown to close to $1 trillion today. But compared to other asset classes, which includes gold, fixed income markets, global equities, that's a $250 trillion market today. So if we look at overall global flows, crypto and digital assets is still at a very, very small percentage relative to other asset classes. And I think the why now question is actually super important to me because over the past few years, due to certain unforeseen circumstances, which includes the COVID pandemic, what we've seen is that governments and central banks have taken on a new order of money printing. Right? So a lot of people talk about M2 money supply and M1 money supply. And it's a fact that over the past 5 years, the US Feds have printed close to just over $8 trillion in terms of new money supply. And that's just M2. If we look at actual real liquid money supply, M1, right, more than 80% of M1 money supply was printed over the last couple of years. What this means is there's a whole new flow of US liquidity or US dollar-based liquidity that's flowing into the global economy. Then the question is, where does it go? Right? And recently, we've seen a lot of governments talk about currency depreciation versus the US dollar. And during a period of high inflation, this topic is obviously extremely pertinent because it means two things. If your currency is depreciating against the dollar and you're importing a lot of goods pegged to the US dollar contracts, the cost of importing goods goes up. Then the second thing as well then, which means as your currency depreciates, does this lead to higher inflation? And I think in most democratic countries, inflation or sustained inflation is not something that democratically elected governments want. Because the people afford less and less as the cost of energy goes up, people start expecting the governments to bail them out. And when that option is not available, they want to see change. And the change is not just positive change in terms of socio-economic change. It often means change in terms of the ruling party and in terms of who's in control. So once again, 2022 has been a very, very volatile year, both in terms of asset prices as well in terms of global affairs. We obviously have the Russian-Ukraine conflict, which is very unfortunate. That has led to the energy markets being extremely fractured. That has led to high energy price inflation in key Western European markets. And we've also seen countries, including Japan and including the UK recently, practice some form of yield curve control, or YCC. For those of you not familiar with the term YCC, it's basically a method of preventing the interest rates on your national bonds from getting too high. And the way you do that is to actually buy back bonds from the market to keep the market price at a certain level. But when that happens, what you're essentially doing is release liquidity back into the market temporarily just to adjust market prices. And I think, looking at the UK, we talk about 2022 being a year of first. We've also recently had a UK Prime Minister that has had the shortest stint ever, I think 44 days. A lot of that just due to having a out-of-sync strategy and announcement when it came to fiscal policy relative to monetary policy. So I know I'm talking a lot about macroeconomics, but to me this is extremely relevant because it explains or it answers part of the question which I'm asking, which is why do we need the blockchain and why do we need crypto today? And actually I'll break it down into 3 key reasons which I'll elaborate. And the first key reason is blockchain represents a technology that can truly be the future of money. The second thing is global liquidity needs new alternatives and new options to flow into. And without new asset classes such as digital assets, what we're seeing is economies are starting to take liberties to actually try and decouple themselves from the fundamentals of economics. And the third thing, which I guess holds the place very true to my heart, is I think humanity at its very core needs blockchain. Right? We'll talk about censorship. We'll talk about people residing in a certain country being blocked from the international banking system such as SWIFT. We'll talk about countries not being able to afford the right energy contracts because they're being denied access to certain currencies. So I think at its very core, humanity also needs blockchain. So let's talk about the technology aspect. I think we're all here today because blockchain represents this new shiny object that's often very exciting. But in terms of people building apps, right, decentralized apps, DeFi, GameFi, CommunityFi, on top of different kind of layer ones, there aren't that many amazing success stories that actually have truly proven the value of the apps, right? But that does not mean that the technology isn't viable. And I think one interesting stat that we look at here is just by even pure evolution of the decentralized exchange market. At Binance, we operate a centralized exchange. But if we look at the DEX market, it's actually grown in market share from single-digit percentage points to double-digit percentage points over the last 12 months. And if you ask me, in 3 to 5 years, I think decentralized exchanges will probably see even more volume flowing through it. And that's just one application of the blockchain. Then we have things like NFTs in the metaverse. To me, I study economics in school. The reason why NFTs represent something that's pretty interesting is because it solves an age-old economic problem, which is the assignment of economic and intellectual property rights. There's a more efficient way of assigning digital rights and assigning economic rights. Is there a more efficient way of transacting? Does it give creators, does it give people who innovate, does it give content creators truly more power over their individual intellectual property rights? Does it decentralize agencies that have thrived by always being the middleman by protecting, or so-called protecting, the digital rights or the economic rights of creators? So I think NFTs represents a very interesting technology, right? Being non-fungible and all. And then obviously you have new technologies such as soul-bound tokens or at Binance, we call them Binance account-bound tokens, where you have NFTs that are tied to specific wallets. And if these wallets have gone through some form of KYC, then you can actually have things like identities that are tied to specific accounts that have gone through KYC. Then the other very interesting application of the blockchain is obviously digital currencies. I think many of us know CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, is something that countries talk about often. I think CZ, who will be talking via Zoom call after this, just announced on Twitter that the Central Bank of Kazakhstan have announced that they're going to build the CBDC on the BNB chain. So that's an example of application of the blockchain as a technology layer. And then we have countries now moving into putting the national ID on the blockchain, right? By putting this on a public ledger, you can actually even separate the private keys and encryption from the people who hold the data. In that sense, you're actually putting together decentralization and blockchain technology to actually encrypt national ID data in a more decentralized manner. So once again, many applications, and I see even traditional Web2 companies embracing blockchain technology to try to move into the space of Web3. I think that's part of the reason why we're supporting Elon and his Twitter takeover. We believe that tokenization and Web3 technology has a role to play in social media. The other kind of key interesting trend in Korea is that companies like Naver, Kakao already have extensive investments in the metaverse and blockchain space. Right? Kakao obviously is very closely related to Clayton. We have Naver that has a Petal, which is the kind of metaverse play. And I see many, many other companies in Korea also adopting this technology to move into the Web3 space, including more traditional chaebols, such as your Samsungs, SKs, and Lottes. Right? How can they leverage digital assets and tokens to bring more value to the existing businesses which are already fairly large in terms of total scale and market capitalization. So I think the technology aspect is very important. And then that's without even talking about what we call the more hybrid digital assets, such as security tokens, which I understand in Korea, people are already starting to test out real estate-backed security tokens, and there are also many other more traditional security firms moving into the STO space, which I believe eventually is one of the key ambitions of Busan as well, which is to facilitate more STO exchanges. Then the second key part, which I think is very, very important, which is blockchain technology needs to be adopted now in order to prevent the flow of global liquidity from breaking down. And very often when you speak to central banks, especially central banks with controlled currencies, the term global liquidity makes them feel a little uncomfortable, right? I think in some sense it defies the traditional impossible trinity in economics, where any country with a controlled currency does not want complete free flow of capital in and out of the country. But once again, take a step back and we look at the overall global crypto market. 75% of global spot volume is actually still traded in US dollar stable coins, right? That remains a fact. But in Korea, for example, which has a very, very healthy, growing local exchange market, right? Over 90% of volume is actually traded in KRW pairs, right? And I think that shows you, obviously, the difference between the Korean market and the global market. But that also creates a phenomenon. And I think some of you who've been in the crypto game early enough will be familiar with the term, the kimchi premium, which previously was a premium when you buy Bitcoin on Korean exchanges. And that's due to the fact that global liquidity was not readily available. And global liquidity is super important because it means a few things for people who want to access this new asset class. Obviously, it means lower spreads. It means, more healthy, deeper bid depths. It also means less amounts of forced liquidations, which means that consumers ultimately are more protected. It also becomes harder to manipulate prices within an exchange. And I think Busan's ambition to really launch a Busan spot exchange with global liquidity or global order books plugged in is very, very admirable. But the technical execution of this is actually not easy. Number one, you need to understand how global liquidity operates from both a technical perspective as well as from a global capital flows perspective. From a technical perspective, talk about things like matching engine, right? There are different orders going into different order books with different instructions for it to be filled, right? Fill and kill versus fill or kill versus iceberg type orders. When there's no standardization around orders in terms of global order books, it becomes really, really hard for these orders to be matched on an efficient manner, and this leads to a less efficient marketplace. The second thing as well is understanding and consolidating liquidity when it comes to trading pairs. It's no secret that Binance.com globally, recently we consolidated a lot of the US dollar stablecoins into the BUSD, and part of it was to actually consolidate liquidity to the BUSD stablecoin, which we believe is a very well collateralized stablecoin, to also provide healthier liquidity and bid spreads to specific trading pairs. So that's one thing that global liquidity needs to take into consideration of as well. And the third thing is, when it comes to global liquidity, who are your market makers and who are your target audiences, right? Ultimately, retail consumers will always want to trade, preferably in their own local currency. But institutional investors might be a lot more agnostic because they have different strategies to hedge for currency differences, and they have access to various derivatives and other options out there that makes it easier for them to generate alpha on their portfolio. But without, once again, stable coins today, it's going to be really, really difficult for any global exchange out there to fully leverage the benefits of global liquidity. And I think that's one thing that I think everyone who's involved in the digital asset exchange space needs to take into consideration, which is in today's world where capital flows so freely between countries, where hedge funds, institutions are constantly thinking about how do we allocate capital across different countries, across different asset classes. How does digital assets and what role can digital assets play in this space? And I think on that note, 2022 is also a very special year because people have called Bitcoin digital gold, right? People have called Bitcoin a hedge against inflation. And I think if you look at the year-to-date performance, it certainly has not lived up to that thesis. Does that mean the thesis is wrong? I actually don't think so, right? I think part of it as well is because we're existing in this unprecedented economic environment where there's a combination of hyperinflation and negative economic growth, right? Stagflation is not great. And one thing that affects people's investment and spending efforts, other than the amount of liquidity and money velocity, is actually the price of assets that they own. When all other asset classes are depreciating relative to whatever currency measured in, people fundamentally feel poorer and feel less likely to actually invest in new asset classes. And I think that's something that I'd like to take a step back and really, implore all of you to try and explore, which is, we all know that, digital assets and crypto has grown as an, investment asset class. There's a lot of trading activity, but ultimately, how do we use this technology to actually build better outcomes for humanity, for our communities, for people out there? And I think this year, once again, we've seen the year start off full of conflicts. We have the Russian-Ukraine conflict. But I think, in that story, what we've seen is that Bitcoin is truly a censorship-free currency or censorship-free digital asset. And we've really seen economies like Ukraine receive a huge amount of donations in Bitcoin and actually now moving more and more transactions based on digital assets. And this is actually proven by statistics. So even if you just look at Chainalysis reports in terms of crypto adoption, what you've seen is that since the start of the year, crypto adoption in Ukraine has grown from single-digit percentage points into high double digits right now, just over the span of 6 months. And that's obviously born out of an unfortunate necessity, but that shows you that digital assets and blockchain-based currencies can truly bring a newfound resilience to economies and humanity. And the second thing which Binance is really passionate about is how do we use crypto to really do good for communities? So as part of that, we actually have a Binance charity arm, right? Obviously, I'm shilling this a little, But part of the goal of Binance Charity is to really showcase that digital assets can bring newfound transparency to the world of altruism and to the world of gifting. All right? And I implore all of you, once again, if you've never tried it, try looking at donations and how can we use charitable gifting based on the blockchain to actually build more utility and actually to drive the allocation of capital from people who have a huge amount of crypto assets to the people in need. And when I talk about humanity, I think the third thing that really encourages me about being in Busan here today is that ultimately, I think humans are very entrepreneurial by nature. We like to build new things. Right? I think over the past few years, we've seen overall productivity in economies drop. Right? That has led to a decrease in the multipliers when it comes to investment, or decrease in multipliers when it comes to overall money supply. But it's only through building, through innovation, through matching entrepreneurs with the right type of capital that can we see new ideas being built, see new concepts being tested, see ideas that truly do not have a product market fit fail, and really let the wave of creative destruction take over and see the rise of the next big innovation. And I think all of us here today, at Busan Blockchain Week, we're here to obviously network. We're here to understand what new projects are doing. We're here to really grow the ecosystem. But I think ultimately what I want all of you to really think about is how can we all play our role in terms of helping to build up this new technology and this new asset class. Because without innovation, I truly believe that humanity is dead. And I think innovation exists in many forms. There's obviously innovation in the bioscience space, which has profound impacts on obviously how we live. I operate in the blockchain space, and I can only play my role by saying, one of our true commitments to cities like Busan as a blockchain ecosystem is that we will invest our resources and commitment to helping people build. And what are we building for? We hope to build better technologies. We hope to build for better global capital flows. And ultimately, we hope to build better solutions that will make, this world a better place. Sounds cliched, but I think that's something that we truly believe in. So on that note, thank you for having me. Really appreciate all of you turning up, and thank you.
네, 지금까지 리언 풍 Head of APEC 이었습니다. 그렇죠. 혁신 없이 인류는 없다라는 말이 굉장히 인상 깊었습니다.